It is the autumn of 1943, and somewhere in the grey back streets of Lyon, a man is trying very hard to appear ordinary. He sits in a cafe, nursing a glass of wine he cannot really afford, wearing a jacket that fits him well enough. His French is passable. His cover story is rehearsed. His forged papers are, by the standards of the day, rather good. But he makes one small mistake, and it costs him everything. He adjusts his jacket, and in doing so, he reveals a zip fastener, small, unremarkable, utterly mundane, the kind of thing no one notices, except that the woman seated 2 tables away, who works for the French resistance, notices it immediately, because she knows something that the German intelligence services had, somehow, failed to grasp. That particular zip, its teeth, its slider, its precise mechanism, could not have been manufactured anywhere in continental Europe. It was British, unmistakably, irrefutably British. Within 48 hours, the agent is in resistance hands. His mission, whatever it was, is over before it began. This is not a story about guns or bombs or grand military strategy. It is a story about a zip, and it is, in its own quiet way, one of the most remarkable tales of unintentional intelligence work in the entire history of the Second World War. Because the British zip fastener, so ordinary, so overlooked, became one of the most reliable methods for identifying enemy agents in occupied Europe. And the Germans, for all their meticulous planning, never truly found a way around it. To understand why a zip could matter so much, you need to understand the world into which SOE, the Special Operations Executive, was sending its agents in the early 1940s. The organization, established by Winston Churchill in July 1940 with the famous directive to set Europe ablaze, was tasked with inserting trained operatives into Nazi-occupied territories. These men and women were to gather intelligence, support local resistance networks, sabotage German infrastructure, and generally make life as difficult as possible for the occupying forces. The work was extraordinarily dangerous. The German Sicherheitsdienst, the SD, and the Gestapo were not stupid. They were methodical, well-resourced, and utterly ruthless. An agent who made even a single slip, a wrong word, an unfamiliar gesture, a document that did not quite match the local format, could expect arrest, interrogation, and, in many cases, execution. SOE and its American counterpart, the OSS, invested enormous effort in the construction of cover identities. Forged identity papers were produced with painstaking care. Agents were trained in the customs, dialect, and daily habits of whatever region they were being sent to. They carried French cigarettes, French money, French ration, books. Every visible element of their person was designed to pass inspection. And yet, time and again, the clothes let them down. The problem was structural. Britain and continental Europe, particularly France, had developed distinctly different manufacturing traditions in certain small but critical areas. The most significant of these was the zip fastener. European manufacturers, primarily German and French firms, produced zip fasteners with a particular tooth profile, a particular alloy composition, and a particular slider mechanism. British manufacturers, led by companies such as Lightning Fasteners Limited of Birmingham, had developed their own designs. The differences were subtle. To the casual eye, a British zip and a continental zip looked essentially the same. But to someone who knew what to look for, a trained observer, a suspicious gendarme, a resistance member who had been briefed, the distinction was clear and consistent. This was not initially a problem that anyone had anticipated. It became one only when agents started disappearing. The SOE's clothing and equipment sections were based primarily at a series of requisitioned properties around London, with significant operations at Wanborough Manor in Surrey, and later at various locations in the Baker Street area, from which the organisation took its common nickname among those who knew of its existence. The tailoring and equipment workshop, known informally as Station 15, though its precise designation shifted over the course of the war, employed a remarkable collection of specialists. Former Savile Row cutters worked alongside continental émigré tailors who had fled France, Belgium, and the Netherlands after the German invasion. Together, their job was to produce clothing that would pass scrutiny in the country to which an agent was being sent. The workshop's challenge with zip fasteners was not one of ignorance, but of supply. British manufactured zips were everywhere. Continental ones were not. In the early months of the program, workshop staff did what they could, sourcing pre-war continental stock, cannibalizing clothing brought over by refugees, sometimes using zips salvaged from garments that had been worn and washed sufficiently to remove their newness. But demand outstripped supply almost immediately. The engineering distinction between a British zip and its continental counterpart came down to several factors. The tooth profile, the interlocking metal or early plastic teeth that form the central mechanism, differed in both width and the angle of the locking surface. British Lightning zips used a slightly more acute tooth angle, which gave them their characteristic smooth action. Continental zips of the period, particularly those of German manufacture, by companies operating under IG Farben's industrial umbrella, used a marginally wider tooth with a different alloy blend, typically higher in zinc content. The slider mechanisms also differed. British sliders had a characteristic diamond-shaped pull tab in standard civilian production, while French and German equivalents tended toward a more rectangular or teardrop-shaped tab. None of this was classified information. It was simply manufacturing variance, the ordinary consequence of two industries developing independently over 2 decades. But in the context of clandestine operations, it was catastrophic. A trained resistance operative, or worse, a trained SD officer examining a detained individual, could identify a British zip with a reasonable degree of confidence simply by touch and visual inspection. The teeth felt different under the thumb, the slider moved differently, and the pull tab, that tiny metal tongue, told its own unmistakable story. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The operational consequences were felt most sharply in France, where the Réseau Prosper network and several related circuits suffered devastating penetration between 1943 and 1944. Historian M.R.D. Foote, whose official history of SOE in France remains the definitive account, noted that clothing irregularities, including zip fasteners, button composition, and thread type, were cited in post-war debriefings by surviving agents as among the most anxiety-inducing elements of their cover. Several agents reported being questioned specifically about clothing details by French collaborators and German security personnel. The SOE response was pragmatic and, ultimately, only partially successful. Agents were instructed to replace any British clothing items, including those bearing British zips, with genuinely continental alternatives before deployment wherever possible. Safe houses in neutral countries, particularly in Spain and Switzerland, became staging points where agents could be fully re-equipped with authentic local garments. The forged papers teams extended their remit to include garment authentication, sourcing not merely continental zips, but continental thread, continental button molds, and continental stitching patterns. One senior SOE quartermaster, whose identity remains partly obscured in the surviving records, reportedly described the zip problem as the most maddening small detail in the entire business. He was not wrong. An agent could carry perfect papers, speak flawless French, know every street in Marseille, and be undone by a slider pull tab no larger than a thumbnail. It is instructive to compare the British situation with German practice. When German intelligence, the Abwehr, and later the SD, ran its own agents into Britain, they faced an equivalent problem in reverse. British clothing had its own distinctive manufacturing signatures, and MI5 was not slow to recognize the utility of this. Several German agents who landed in Britain by parachute or sea in the early years of the war were identified partly through clothing analysis. The famous case of Joseph Jacobs, who was arrested in Huntingdonshire in January 1941 after parachuting into a field, involved clothing examination as part of his initial security assessment. German-made garments of the period used different button compositions, different trouser cut conventions, and yes, different zip designs. The Americans, when the OSS began inserting its own operatives into occupied Europe from 1942 onwards, faced an identical version of the British zip problem. American manufacturing was, if anything, even more immediately identifiable than British production. American zips of the wartime period were predominantly produced by Talon Incorporated, based in Meadville, Pennsylvania, and their design was substantially different from either British or continental equivalents. American agents required the same thorough re-equipping as their British counterparts, and the OSS tailoring sections in London and later in North Africa and Italy worked in close collaboration with their SOE equivalents to address the problem. The Germans, to their credit, did eventually recognize the pattern. By 1943, SD training manuals included clothing authentication as a standard component of agent detection methodology. French collaborator networks were briefed on what to look for. The practical effect was to raise the stakes for every SOE and OSS agent in the field. What had once been an oversight became a known vulnerability, which meant that even agents equipped with entirely genuine continental clothing now had to live with the knowledge that their garments would be scrutinized in a way that no genuine French civilians ever would be. The true historical impact of the British zip problem is difficult to assess with precision because the relevant records are fragmentary. SOE files held at the National Archives at Kew contain extensive material on clothing authentication procedures, but the specific instances in which zip identification contributed directly to an agent's capture are rarely documented with the clarity one might wish. Captured agents, naturally, did not always survive to provide full debriefings, and the German and French security services did not publish comprehensive records of their detection methods. What the surviving evidence does suggest is that clothing irregularities, of which the zip was the most consistently noted, contributed to a pattern of agent compromise that significantly degraded SOE's operational effectiveness in France between 1942 and 1944. The Réseau Prosper collapse of June 1943, which resulted in the arrest of approximately 400 people connected to the network, has been attributed to multiple causes, and clothing detection was almost certainly among the secondary factors that enabled German security forces to identify individuals connected to resistance activity. More broadly, the zip problem forced a professionalization of clandestine logistics that had lasting consequences for intelligence tradecraft. The meticulous attention to material culture, to the small physical objects that make up an identity, became a permanent feature of intelligence training after the war. The idea that a person's clothing, their possessions, their everyday objects could betray them as surely as any document or verbal slip entered the standard curriculum of intelligence services on both sides of the Atlantic. Several surviving examples of SOE authenticated continental clothing, including garments that passed through Station 15's workshops, are held by the Imperial War Museum in London. The museum's collection includes items of clothing that were worn by agents in the field: jackets, coats, and trousers, from which British-made components had been removed and replaced with continental equivalents. They look utterly ordinary, which of course was the entire point. Return for a moment to that cafe in Lyon, to the man adjusting his jacket, to the woman who notices. He did not know when he dressed that morning that he was wearing a confession. He did not know that the small metal slider on his jacket, manufactured in Birmingham to a specification that had seemed entirely reasonable to its designers, was broadcasting his origins as clearly as if he had worn a Union Jack on his lapel. He had been trained in fieldcraft, in codes, in the geography of a city he had studied from maps. No one had thought to tell him about the teeth of a zip. That woman in the cafe, her name is not recorded, or, if it is, the records have not yet been made public, had been briefed. She knew what to look for. She had been told, probably in a cold room somewhere in the unoccupied zone, that a British zip had a particular tooth angle and a particular slider pull tab, and that if she ever saw one on the jacket of a man who was trying too hard to look like he belonged, she should take note of the table number and leave quickly. She did, and the network held, and the man did not send back whatever intelligence he had been sent to gather. This is what makes the story of the British zip so remarkable and, in its way, so quietly devastating. It was not a weapon. It was not a stratagem. It was simply the collision of two industrial traditions on the body of a frightened man in a cafe in southern France. The British had not designed their zips to betray their agents. The Germans had not designed their detection methods to look for zips specifically. History had arranged this particular ambush entirely by accident, and yet the lesson it taught was one that intelligence services never forgot. In the world of clandestine operations, there is no such thing as an unimportant detail. The smallest object, the most mundane fastening, the tiniest mechanical difference between one country's manufacturing tradition and another's, any of these things can be the thing that gives you away. The British zip did not win the war, but it reminded everyone who came after that wars are lost and won in the smallest particulars, and that the most dangerous enemy you can face is one who has learned to look very, very closely at the things you never thought to hide.